Hello, my name is Sheldon Scott, and I am the Director of Culture for Eaton Workshop and the Director of Culture here at Eaton, DC. And as a part of my duties and convictions here, I'm responsible for the artwork that goes into the space. And what that means is I'm not necessarily one who's always curating the work, but always the one that makes sure that the work is connected to the vision and the mission that our founder, Catherine Lowe, espoused when she set to create this project. And for this particular experience here, this work was curated by our Director of Impact, who works both on our global and local team, Sebi Medina Tayak, who just ran across the camera. Yes, and he'd been working with frontline organizations for quite some time, doing direct impact work. And a big part of that work is the work of art and artists. And we're going to have a conversation with one of those artists today. We're going to talk about the connection of public art and the activist. There's one thing for sure, that artists are often looked to as a part of a solution for very complex problems. You know, as we live in this political world, sometimes the ideas and the concepts that come up to us are very complicated to think about and to digest and process. And art has always been a way to ease that digestion process and also to create greater access points into these large complex ideas. And public art and street art and graffiti art has always been a representation of the voice and the message and the dialogue between art and big ideas. So here we're with the artist Monolith, who collaborated with the collective Divorce Culture to make this beautiful mural that we have installed here at Eaton, DC. And the conversation is very clear, and we're just really excited to be in conversation with him and everyone else that he represents about the importance of creating work and posting works like this in the public so people can have an idea of how to engage in these conversations. So, Monolith, if you don't mind, just giving us a brief insight into like the work that you created and what was the particular conversation and the pointed conversation that you wanted audiences to take away from this installation.
Yeah, thank you, Sheldon. So, like you were saying, I collaborated on this with artist Divorce Culture, and so a lot of my work is collaborating, and I like to incorporate elements of graffiti and street art in my work. And so rooting my work, like it is political, a lot of my work, but I like to root it in, for me, a revolutionary art form of graffiti. And so this is like a combination of street art and graffiti. And so me and my friend who I collaborate with, we kind of work along those lines. And so we have the message Defund MPD here, and so kind of like the idea is using the strength of a revolutionary art form like graffiti that was born in the streets, that came out of the projects of New York City, that kind of grew there and became part of like this revolutionary art form of hip hop, and the power that that has, and using that power to convey a powerful message. So, like I said, in this case, it's Defund MPD, and just reflecting on what's happening right now with the uprising. And part of the reason why we wanted to do this was because there's been a lot of art going up around the city, a lot of boarded up spaces, and it's been great to see because there's been a lot of messages of solidarity around the city, like saying Black Lives Matter. Some have like gone a little further to say their names, things like that. But we really haven't seen anybody take the chance and really like explore the demands of Black Lives Matter and what they have. And so it's kind of a mix of seeing like sometimes these folks use these messages to co-opt the movement and just create, you know, like a safe works of art to protect their space too, because a lot of times, you know, with folks coming in to protest and everything, they'll put it up so that their businesses don't get, you know, destroyed or whatever, just whatever might happen. So We didn't see these kind of messages go up. We wanted something stronger. We wanted it to actually represent what the call is from the movements and what needs to be done coming out of the uprising and what's happening. So it's using that idea, that background, and having these letters physically crush this MPD cop car and just showing the strength of the people and the movement and the power of art and hip hop to create a force of change and to, like you said, start that conversation and to hopefully use art as a vehicle to push this forward, because it is so important, and the momentum periodically dies down as things are happening in the city, and like things are so crazy with like the pandemic, and again, this is a message that Black Lives Matter was co-opted by the mayor. So she did that big mural on the plaza, and a publicity stunt, battle with the president, but they both kind of support police brutality. They both do. And so Black Lives Matter had been calling on the mayor for years to release the tapes and videos of folks that have been murdered by the police, and she's just always been like fighting against them, not really listening to Black Lives Matter. And then so for her to put this message on there, it was kind of like that double effect, like kind of like not co-opting it, using that as publicity for herself. And then when Black Lives Matter went ahead and then wrote the message on there, recently they tried to be slick, I think, and like kind of repaved it. Didn't even go over it, but repaved it.
Yep.
So she was just waiting for the right time to go over it. So it's like they're afraid of what the demands are and like what the actual calls are to create the change that is needed to represent, like what Black Lives Matter means and what's happening right now. So yeah, it's just like a mix of conveying all that, like this upside down peace sign, no justice, no peace, conveying that message, and like this is like kind of like a reference to Tamir Rice with the, how the toy gun, yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's just wild, how before Kenosha,
which actually gives us the typical American context to this.
Right.
Like, you got a 17-year-old with a weapon that can kill illegally.
Exactly.
As opposed to a 12-year-old playing with the toy that we designed and built for him in an environment that we built for him to play in.
Yes.
And he was executed as a result of that.
Right. So, like you said, there's further context. I mean, he walked away with an actual like militarized weapon.
Yep.
An AR-17. Police just let him walk by.
After killing two.
Got to go home. Yeah. So it's just like it shows the hypocrisy of America, and then the institution of police and how it's always been connected to controlling things and being racist and killing black people. Yeah.
You made like two amazing points that I want to kind of talk a little bit about. First of which was about the businesses' response to the uprising after the murder of George Floyd and people boarding up their buildings, and how Black Lives Matter transformed or was reduced and abused to become the black-owned business signs of 1968 as a way to provide a shield over these businesses.
Totally, yeah.
And a way to mislead organizations or people that they think might be, hostile to them, are hostile to businesses, are hostile to capitalism as a whole.
Yes.
And use that as a shield almost to protect themselves from their own reality or any sense of accountability about what they've done, how they've treated black people who've entered those stores historically. And, one of the things I say, people asked, is Eaton going to put Black Lives Matter on the building? And I was like, we don't need to put it on the building because it's in the building. It's been in the building since the building first opened. And it's a part of our practice. And, granted, we are far from perfect on this. Like, we still have a lot of institutional, because we realize like this is an institutional system that, far outdates all of us. And, we have to constantly work at chipping it away. but we are committed to creating new conversations through that framework moving forward. But we didn't have to do what I see to be a very performative action, a very shallow action, a very self-driven action of people trying to protect themselves and protect their property, meanwhile having no regards for the protection of black lives. So, like, as an artist, recognizing that, you know, putting that in your practice and having that kind of criticality to your work, because we know that there are a lot of artists out there who use this as an opportunity for self-gain.
Yep.
You know, who might have put up like these memorials for the people that were lost, and you know, that process is a critical one. It's a part of our healing, but it's not the work. The work is the call to action. The work is what you've done here with this like very clear call to defund the police. And it's not an easy conversation for people to understand. I think we understand that a lot of people, when they hear defund the police, they mean that gets rid of the police department.
Right.
And there's a huge language and understanding barrier.
Yeah.
But like what we're really saying is like demilitarize the police.
Yeah.
You know, stop like sponsoring state violence against black and brown and minority bodies. That's what we're saying when we're defunding police. But like people have a challenge with that conversation, but people don't have the challenge with the conversation of defunding the schools, because we've been defunding schools for a very long time. You know, people don't have a conversation with the prospect of defunding Medicare and other social projects. But when it comes to this, you know, the narratives, the tropes that are put out there as if like the world is just going to go in complete peril, as if it's not already there.
Right.
You know, it's a very challenging conversation, and I think for, you know, your work and the work of your collaborators to create something, and then for Sebi to say, hey, we need to put this on the building, you know, it says a lot about how do we posit those conversations in a way that people come to understand. Because like the Black Lives Matter is just the beginning. You know, now there's an action, now there's something that we must do in order to like actually affect change. Yeah. You know, and it's more just like the proclamation. Right. It's the work that comes after, and this sets the framework for like letting people know what they need to do. Because like when you tell when you say Black Lives Matter, you're not giving people an actionable thing to do. But when you say defund the police, you're giving them the prescription for the actual change.
Yeah.
One thing I want to ask you about is like, you know, besides working with artists, your experience of working with activists and being an activist yourself, if you know, ascribe to that term, like how important is that in the formation of the work and the conversations and the symbolism and the metaphors that you use? Because, you know, I feel like if you don't get the message right, you know, your artwork could actually do more harm than good. And I see a lot of harmful artwork out there. And I want to hear from you how important and how critical and vital the process of being an activist or working with an activist is to informing your practice and the type of works that you make.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. So for me, it's like super important, and I feel like I'm privileged because like I got to start creating art in this city, coming out of a social justice art institution. So like there was a Studio 2B in Union Arts, which was a cultural hub of the city.
Yep.
And so I got to get to know like a lot of folks that have been doing this work, that have been rooted in like folks that, you know, activists that were working in the movement and stuff like that for like the past 10 years. My friend Adapt and Cesar have, it goes by Revolution. They have been creating art along those lines, so I really got to see how they did it, and it was like around the time I was being like politicized and then understanding the importance of rooting it in the movement. So so for me, like if I'm gonna approach something like this or create this kind of art, like I've been fortunate enough to work with folks in the movement, like Black Lives Matter in the past through our collective that we kind of came out of that building, because that building got displaced through development.
Developed by a hotel project, actually.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So so out of that came the 401 Collective. So we are a crew of artist activists, and so some of us are artists and some of us are activists, but all our work is informed by and connected to the actual work that is being done on the ground. So before we create work, a lot of times we will have discussions, and so it's important if we're going to approach, and myself approach something like this, to make sure that it's coming from the folks that are doing the work, and then properly representing like what the message is and the importance and all that stuff. So
yeah, I feel like that is the scholarship. And and when I say it's scholarship, I don't mean like the Western construct of scholarship. I mean the scholarship that people have in their experiences and their lived experiences and their practices, that doesn't need to be vetted by colonial structure to be scholarship, but like the scholarship that you get and that you all like appreciate and study when you talk about listening to these communities and finding out what it is they really need, and finding a way to help them like amplify that message or echo that message, and give that message new and different life through visual arts. I think it's an incredible part of the responsibility that artists have, particularly when they're having public art conversations around major political ideology that has direct impact on people being able to live or die. So there's one, obviously like, there's a history and a component to the type of work that you do, street art and graffiti. They're normally done in spaces where you don't necessarily need permission.
right.
A part of the work is also just like going in there and just like creating these messages and creating a canvas out of the lived experience and out of the built environment.
Yeah.
Without necessarily having to go through that. And I think we've seen, mostly unsuccessful endorsed or state-sponsored mural programs.
Totally.
That sanitize work, that manipulate messages to fit what the state actually wants to say, and not what they, not what the people are wanting to say, not what the artists are wanting to say. We've seen that, and you see a lot of that in DC, and you see a lot of art washing. You see a lot of opportunities that people's like, oh, let's get some artists to do something. Can you talk about the difficulties and challenge of working with an organization, even like Eaton, to collaborate on like putting something like this on a campus? Because it's still a challenge. Eaton is definitely a capitalist expression. There's no denying that. To do something like that, to put something like that, obviously, if not done well, could do considerable harm more than good. Openly share some of the challenges that you've had with us, or with this process, and things that organizations that might have the intention of ours that want to do better with stuff like this, because we want to improve this process. We want to create a better canvas for those kinds of voices.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I will say like we appreciate having the space to do this, because we want to create messages like this. Like for us, we want to create art that means something, and nothing's more meaningful than reflecting like what's happening right now and what people need, and like and yeah, everything that's going on. But I will say one of the reasons why I wanted to come and do this here was because of the work that a lot of folks have done here, and the culture of activism that's here. So I felt like there was a space to do this, and so it's just easy to work with y'all and to be able to create this here, and that's important because there's not many places in the city where you can do that. I will say there's a lot of times with like murals that are going up around the city, like you said, like a lot of it is used as a tool of gentrification. A lot of times artists from other cities come down and they create amazing, beautiful works of art, but there's implications to a lot of it, and some of it has messages that are positive, and some of them don't really mean anything. But a lot of times you kind of have to walk a line with given opportunities to create art in certain spaces, like whether it's the scale or where you're doing it, and in terms of how safe people are expecting you to play it and the art that you're creating. So a lot of times some artists might not want to create the art because they don't want to do that.
Yep.
And a lot of times we don't want to create art in the spaces that are made available because the implications that it has into where it's being done, right? So there is a challenge. Like for some of us, we just won't create art in a lot of places that are more publicly available for the majority of artists to to benefit from that, like to get that mural money, to be seen in certain spaces. So a lot of times we'll forego projects, and that's part of the reason why we created this collective, to be able to look for other avenues and working with other organizations to get space in non-traditional ways that are like sanctioned by the city, and to be involved in murals or art that is used in that way. So that's how we kind of navigated around that. It's been a little difficult, but I feel like it's becoming easier for us to do that, and then just becoming more familiar with like grassroots work of the organizing and working with organizations to get space and work with other people and raise money to create the art and messages that we want, because there really isn't space to do that in the city like that. And so we appreciate being able to do that here, and yeah, so.
Because you mentioned mural money, and there's a lot of mural money out there.
Right.
There's a lot of organizations, business developers that have that mural money, and I think with that mural money comes this idea, this concept of like relief from responsibility.
Yeah.
And like the thing that you mentioned that's very important is like when you create works like this and you put messages into the broader community like this, you realize that there's a consequence, that there's a cost that may or may not translate to the artist, the person making it. One example is like a few years ago, the Arts and Humanities Commission of DC commissioned a work in Anacostia that was called Puck the Police. And all throughout Anacostia, there were these signs saying, "Puck the police, puck the police." It didn't come from the community. The community was actually quite striped and challenged and trying to like rebuild the relationship with the police there. And then all of a sudden, these messages, these state-sanctioned messages, popped up all in these communities. And what happened is like now you created a debt. As an artist, you created a debt on the people that live in that community now, because you created an antagonistic relationship that someone might walking down the street and spit some gum, the police might respond, and all of a sudden, all of this angst now is the burden of that person who's now in front of this police officer and now the target of state violence. And it's not, it's kind of like the butterfly flaps its wing, and there's a hurricane in New Orleans. It's like artists don't sometimes connect like their responsibility, with the community to the work that they do. So it's great to see that your collective is very intentional about that, and very intentional about getting behind communities and supporting their voice through art, because this is an effective tool for them. It does help them to deliver their message and expand their message, and it's a critical process of any concept of change. If you look at any complicated system that we've ever dealt with, art has always been critical in delivering, an accessibility component to it. I mean, if you look at the alphabet, just imagine like the alphabet is like, you can put those letters together inextricably. It's infinite amount of ways to like build that language out of that. But in order for us to learn and understand it, we have to put it in a song. We have to put an art to it. So we can get the basic elements. And I couldn't imagine what, the difficulty, the challenges of like creating language without that kind of building block. And I feel like art does that. And I feel like the work that you do and that your collective does actually contributes to a positive, you know, art impact on change, as opposed to a lot of neutral and sometimes even negative work. So I want to thank you for trusting Eaton and Sebi enough to allow us to actually house this and be custodians of this work, and you know, just hopefully continue to support you and your organization in helping like individuals get messages like this out into the world. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And do you have anything else you want to say?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, like, I will say, like, there's a lot of art that comes up around the city, and there are places where I think it's safe to do it without having a negative impact. But like you said, there is a lot of places that they do, and there are a lot of implications that come out of like creating art in certain spaces. So some of the art that, you know, like folks and friends will like do in the city is kind of like a celebration of the art itself. And then just like celebrating like Latino culture or women or just any kind of thing like that, where it won't be like a direct message. So it is cool to see a lot of that art go up, but like you said, there is a big conversation as to where the art is being made and the implications of a lot of it, and specifically like the campaign that you mentioned in Anacostia. So it's a complicated discussion. The only other thing I would say is with this piece is that, you know, I was fortunate to work with Divorce Culture, my friend. So he helped me do this. I did the letters, and the idea behind the letters is I think I was kind of talking about it before, but using graffiti and bringing that to a revolutionary art form.
Yeah.
And kind of using an art form that is used by people who don't have to ask permission, can go out there and use their voice, have access to paint materials that they might not have access to money for. You know, like culture, or like historically, like graffiti comes from, you know, folks just going out there, painting their name, stealing cans because they don't got the money, or they're just going to take those cans and make that art. They just be able to continuously put that art out there. And so so a lot of it comes from the power of that, and from hip hop, and then also like the typography, just using the like bold lettering that advertising uses in a capitalist applications, and kind of using that against itself.
Yep.
And then the idea of I did it less here, but the idea of repetition. So propaganda, if you repeat something over and over again, then it becomes more real to somebody. So if we can repeat that in different styles, and then styles that are rooted in those ideas, like the power that gives those letters and the message. So I did the letters, and then Divorce Culture did basically design everything around that, and we just put together in a way that kind of conveyed that message even further, crushing that cop car and the rest of these design elements and stuff like that. And Divorce Culture couldn't be here, but he wanted to say, fuck the police, all cops are bad.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you. Thank you to you, and thank you to Divorce Culture. Yeah, and thank you guys for watching. You know, and like, you know, just don't watch. Like, obviously there's a message and there's a conviction here. You know, like, this is an important message and ideology for us to understand. Like, we do have a major responsibility, both now and in the future, to defund the police system, the police state that we have. You know, we have, you know, San Francisco and other places that are looking, like, you know, there's so many other ways to respond to the human need for help that are not necessarily a function of the police officers. And just also reminding ourselves that the function of police initially were catchers of the enslaved. I happen to be from Georgetown County, where the first sheriff department was totally built around the capturing of you know, emancipated, formerly enslaved people to bring them back into the system of slavery in the United States. And that foundation is still very much a part of the police practices today, and that's a reality that we have to confront. And it is our responsibility to make sure that messages like these are turned into actions, and we hold the state accountable for the situation that we have now, where countless people have been murdered by the state, and we have done nothing to change that system.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for watching. Take some action. Defund the police. Thank you.
Thank you.